Love is supposed to protect, to heal, to bring people closer. But in some cases, it does the opposite. It turns into something dark, something deadly. In this video, we'll explore 5 real stories where love didn't save lives. It ended them. These aren't just tragedies, they're disturbing reminders that the people closest to us can sometimes be the most dangerous. It was May 18, 2022, in New Delhi, India. Shraddha Walkar, a 27-year-old woman from Maharashtra, had recently moved into a rented apartment in the Chhatarpur area with her 28-year-old partner, Aftab Amin Poonawala. To others, they looked like any young couple in love. 2 people who had met on a dating app, moved in together, and were trying to build a life. But behind closed doors, their relationship had taken a much darker turn. They first met in 2019 while working at the same call center in Mumbai. Shraddha was still in college at the time, studying media, but she dropped out to live with Aftab despite her family's strong objections. Her father, Vikas Walkar, warned her many times. He didn't just disapprove of the interfaith relationship. He believed Shraddha hardly knew him. After her mother passed away in 2020, Shraddha briefly returned home, but she soon went back to Aftab. According to her friends, the relationship had become harmful. Aftab often mistreated her, and Shraddha told her friends she felt stuck. Each time they encouraged her to leave, she would say he apologized or made emotional threats that convinced her to stay. In early 2022, the couple moved to Delhi, hoping for a fresh start. But by May, things had only gotten worse. On May 18th, the two argued again, this time about marriage. Shraddha had asked Aftab to finally commit. He refused. According to his later confession, he lost control and ended her life by restricting her airway. What followed was even more disturbing. Instead of reporting what had happened, Aftab made a decision that shocked the country. Drawing from his skills as a chef and inspired by a crime TV show, he used knives and tools to break down Shraddha's body into 35 parts. He placed the remains in a refrigerator he had purchased shortly after. For weeks, Aftab continued living in the apartment with the remains. To hide the smell, he used air fresheners and incense. Every night around 2 a.m., he would take a few pieces in a plastic bag and go to Mehrauli forest to scatter them. He did this for 18 nights. He also continued using Shraddha's phone and social media to message her friends and family, pretending she was still alive. At the same time, he cleaned the apartment using chemicals, threw away her clothes, and even invited other women over, while some of Shraddha's remains were still in the fridge. By August, her friends became suspicious. One of them, Laxman Nadir, noticed that she had stopped replying and that her phone was off. He reached out to Shraddha's brother, who contacted their father. Believing she was in Bangalore, Vikas went looking for her. When he found her apartment locked, he filed a missing person report in Mumbai. The case was moved to Delhi. Police traced her last known location and questioned Aftab. At first, he gave false information, but later confessed. He led police to the forest, where they found 13 decomposed body parts. The head was never found. DNA tests confirmed they belonged to Shraddha. Police also found bloodstains in the kitchen and recovered tools believed to have been used. Aftab admitted he had planned this a week earlier, but delayed when she got emotional during an argument. He was arrested on November 12, 2022. The police built a 629-page case using evidence and witness statements. Shraddha's family testified in court, sharing the cruelty she had faced. Aftab is now in Tihar jail. While he was initially under strict watch, in 2024 the court ruled that he must be treated like other inmates. The case led to heated public debate. Some blamed dating apps and live-in relationships. Others focused on the religious aspect. But many argued that the real issue was how long Shraddha had suffered in silence and how no one was able to help her in time. It was November 18, 2006 in Flanders, Belgium. Els van Doren, a 38-year-old mother of 2 and experienced skydiver, joined 11 others for a group jump. She had done over 2,300 skydives and was confident in the air. Among the group were Marcel Sommers, an instructor she was romantically involved with, and Els Klatemans, a close friend and fellow skydiver from the Zwartberg Parachute Club. But this skydive would be her last. The jump turned into one of Belgium's most disturbing cases. What looked like an accident turned out to be carefully planned and very personal. Van Doren was married and well-respected. At the club, many admired her, including 26-year-old Klotmans, who was often called Babs to avoid confusion. Both women were close, but both were also involved with the same man, Marcel Sommers. Klotmans had been seeing Marcel first. She often spent Friday nights at his house. Later, Van Doren began seeing him too, and their relationship became more serious. Marcel started spending Saturdays with Van Doren, and Klottemans was gradually pushed aside. One weekend before the deadly jump, all three stayed at Marcel's house. Van Doren slept in his bed. Klottemans was made to sleep downstairs. Investigators believe that night may have changed everything. Van Doren had taken Klottemans' place, not just physically, but emotionally. The next morning, Van Doren's parachute bag was still in the hallway. Prosecutors believed Klottemans had the chance to cut the cords inside. Experts said it would have taken less than 30 seconds, using only a pair of scissors and some privacy. A few days later, they were all back in the air for another formation jump. 12 skydivers boarded the plane. 4 of them, Van Doren, Klottemans, Summers, and another man, planned to link hands midair and then separate at around 3,200 feet to open their parachutes. Everything went as planned. The 4 linked hands then let go. The others opened their parachutes. Van Doren's didn't. She pulled the cord. Nothing. She reached for her backup chute. Still nothing. Her helmet camera was recording. It captured her trying everything, desperately pulling at straps, but nothing worked. Then she disappeared from view. She fell over 2 miles and landed in someone's garden in Opglavik. She passed away on impact. A detailed investigation later confirmed that both her main and reserve chutes had been cut. This was not an accident. Police focused on those closest to Van Doren. Marcel was open about his involvement with both women, but Klottemans stood out. A month later, when police asked her for another statement, she seriously harmed herself. She survived, but the timing raised red flags. Investigators learned about that weekend at Marcel's house and how the parachute was left in an open hallway. They also found anonymous letters Klottemans had sent out, revealing personal details about Van Doren's life. The tone suggested jealousy and resentment. During questioning, Klottemans admitted she always felt second to Van Doren. In a letter to the media, she even wrote that she thought poorly of herself. Prosecutors believed her emotional state and rejection may have pushed her to act. She was arrested in January 2007, released in 2008, and went to trial in 2010. The case got massive media attention. Her trial lasted 4 weeks. There was no direct evidence, no fingerprints, no witnesses, but the motive and timing were strong. The court watched Van Doren's final moments through the helmet footage. A psychiatrist described Klottemans as manipulative and struggling with mental health. The defense argued there was no solid proof, only theory and emotion. On October 20, 2010, Klottemans was found guilty. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison with the chance for early release after serving part of her sentence. Van Doren's children, then teenagers, sat in court. They listened as the defense asked for mercy for the person responsible. They walked out in tears. Klottemans still claims she's innocent. Van Doren died doing what she loved, skydiving. But she never expected betrayal from someone she called a friend, and her final moments were recorded on the very helmet meant to keep her safe. It was early morning on November 5, 1989, in the quiet neighborhood of Marston Hills in San Diego, California. Inside a large home at 1041 Cypress Avenue, Dan Broderick, a successful attorney, and his new wife Linda Kokena were asleep. They had only been married for 7 months. The house was meant to be a fresh start. But that morning, everything ended. Standing in their bedroom was Dan's ex-wife, Betty Broderick. In her hand was a revolver. Without saying anything, she fired 5 times. Linda was struck in the head and chest and passed away immediately. Dan was hit in the chest. As he tried to call for help, Betty pulled the phone cord from the wall and walked out. Betty later claimed she didn't mean to harm them. She said she only wanted to show them how deeply she was struggling, but her actions left 2 people dead, and she became one of the most talked about names in California's legal history. Betty Broderick was born Elizabeth Ann Biseglia on November 7, 1947, in Brooklyn, New York. Raised in a strict Catholic family, she was taught to be a good wife and mother. She met Dan at age 17 during a football game in Pittsburgh. He was intelligent and driven. They married in 1969, and Betty worked different jobs to support Dan through medical school at Cornell and law school at Harvard. After graduation, they moved to La Jolla, California. Dan built a high-paying law career. Their lifestyle changed quickly. Luxury cars, a mansion, private clubs. They had 4 children, but at home, Betty handled parenting alone, while Dan focused on work. In 1983, Dan hired a young receptionist named Linda Kokena. She had no college degree and limited work experience. Betty became suspicious something was going on. On Dan's birthday, she found signs of a party at his office, but he was out with Linda. Angry, she went home and burned his clothes. Dan denied anything was happening, but in 1985 he filed for divorce and later admitted he had feelings for Linda. Betty felt abandoned. She had helped Dan build his career and now he was starting a new life without her. The situation grew worse. Betty left angry voicemails, smeared food in his home, spray-painted rooms, and once crashed her car into his house. Dan got restraining orders and full custody of their kids. Betty was briefly placed under psychiatric care after one incident. She said she was being pushed out of the life she helped build. Their divorce was finalized in 1986. Dan kept the house and the children. Betty received a monthly payment but said it wasn't enough. In an interview, she said, "He took my home, my kids, my money. If he had hit me, I could have shown people what he did." In April 1989, Dan married Linda. Friends said the couple rarely talked about Betty, but Linda was afraid. She even asked Dan to wear a protective vest at the wedding. He didn't. 1 month before their wedding, Betty got a Smith & Wesson revolver. On November 5th at around 5:30 a.m., she used a key she had secretly taken from her daughter and entered Dan's home. She walked upstairs into the bedroom. Linda woke up and shouted, "Call the police!" Betty pulled the trigger. Linda passed away immediately. Dan was still alive after being shot, but when he reached for the phone, Betty pulled the cord from the wall. She later called her daughter and turned herself in. She admitted everything but said she didn't plan it. She said Linda's scream startled her. At her 1990 trial, prosecutors argued Betty planned the act. They used a phone call where she had said, "I wish he would just die." They said she removed the phone on purpose to stop Dan from calling for help. Betty was convicted and sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. Some believe she was pushed to the edge. Others say she let her emotions go too far. Her story gained national attention. It was turned into books, TV shows, and a Netflix series, Dirty John, the Betty Broderick Story. Now in her 70s, Betty is still in prison in California. She has been denied parole twice and will be eligible again in 2032. Her children remain divided. Some believe she deserves release. Others feel she has not accepted what she did. Dan and Linda Broderick are buried together in San Diego. Their story is still one of the most well-known cases of emotional breakdown and loss. It was October 25, 2016, in Greensburg, Indiana. Wendy Sabatini, a 44-year-old mother of two, was in her upstairs bedroom at her home on East Washington Street. She had moved to Greensburg a few years earlier from Logansport and worked at a nearby auto parts plant. Her son, Lake, had just returned home from an internship and was living with her again. That afternoon, everything seemed normal, until it suddenly wasn't. At the same time, 43-year-old Jason Eaton, Wendy's boyfriend and co-worker, was on his way to the house. In his pocket, he carried an engagement ring. He planned to propose. Wendy and Jason had been together for some time. On the surface, their relationship looked steady, but Wendy had already made it clear she didn't want to remarry. Her son later said she had no plans to say yes. Still, Jason walked upstairs, ring in hand. Wendy was sitting on the far side of the bed when he approached. Before he could ask the question, she saw the ring and told him no. That one word changed everything. Jason walked over to the nightstand and took out a gun. Then he moved behind her. Without saying a word, he pointed the weapon and fired once. Wendy passed away instantly. He didn't check on her. He didn't call anyone. Instead, he left the room, walked downstairs, and exited the house. Lake, who had just gotten home, believed his mom was still at work. He made dinner and spent the evening downstairs, unaware that something terrible had just happened upstairs. Meanwhile, Jason drove to the home of a woman he knew. When he arrived, he told her, "I messed up. I think I hurt Wendy." Shocked, she agreed to drive him to the police station. Later that evening, Jason walked into the Greensburg Police Department and asked to speak with an officer. He calmly said he had just ended his girlfriend's life. Officers rushed to the home. Lake let them in, still unaware of what had happened. They went upstairs and found Wendy slumped over with a single wound to her head. The weapon was on the nightstand, and the ring Jason had brought was nearby. The room was quiet, but it held the weight of what had just taken place. At the station, Jason confessed in full. He said he had been upset when Wendy rejected the proposal, then went to the nightstand, took out the weapon, and fired. He didn't try to hide what he did. Investigators reviewed everything: the confession, the weapon, and the timeline. There were no signs of a struggle or accident. Jason had acted out of anger, unable to accept being told no. Wendy's family and friends were devastated. Her sister, Heather, said she never imagined Jason was capable of something like this. Her son, Lake, said he wasn't surprised his mom had turned down the proposal. She had made her decision long before. Friends and co-workers gathered days later to remember Wendy. One friend, Laura Collins, said it was different to lose someone this way. Not to illness or an accident, but something sudden and avoidable. Wendy was remembered as humble and kind, someone who always smiled. Her former husband, John, who shared 2 children with her, remembered the first time they met. There was something about her, he said. She was always smiling. Jason Eaton was arrested and charged. Years later, in March 2018, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 47 years in prison. He will serve 45 of those behind bars, with the remaining under supervision. He's also banned from contacting Wendy's family for the entire sentence. This wasn't a random act. There was no warning. It was personal, and it happened in seconds. Wendy made a choice she was allowed to make, and for that, her life was taken. Her loved ones are still living with that reality. It was August 2016 in Mexico City. Julio Macias Gonzalez was a 17-year-old teenager living in Iztapalapa, a busy borough known for its tight-knit communities. Julio was like many teens, curious and trying to understand his place in the world. But he was involved in a relationship that many saw as inappropriate. His girlfriend was 24 years old, 7 years older than him. His parents were strongly against it. They had warned him many times, but Julio refused to end things. He believed he had everything under control. On the evening he passed away, Julio spent time with his girlfriend. The exact details of what happened during that time are still unclear. What is known, however, is that she left a hickey on his neck. It didn't seem serious at first, just a mark, but it would soon turn into something much more serious. Later that night, Julio was eating dinner with his family. Everything seemed normal, until he suddenly began having violent convulsions at the table. His family panicked. They had never seen anything like it. He was shaking uncontrollably, and no one knew what was happening. His parents immediately called for help. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but it was already too late. Julio had passed away in his home. Doctors later confirmed he had suffered a stroke, a rare event for someone so young. But what made this case even more shocking was the cause behind it. Medical examiners found that the hickey on Julio's neck had caused damage to a blood vessel beneath the skin. The suction created a small clot, which traveled through his bloodstream. It eventually reached his brain and blocked the blood flow, triggering a fatal stroke. Cases like this are extremely rare, but they have happened before. In 2011, a 44-year-old woman in New Zealand experienced something similar. She lost movement in her left arm and had no idea why. Doctors were confused too, since she had no history of major health problems. Then they saw a fading hickey on her neck. After further testing, they discovered that the suction had caused an artery injury, leading to a clot that traveled to her heart. She was treated with medication and survived. Julio wasn't as lucky. Reports from Mexican news outlets stated that the hickey was directly linked to the clot that caused his stroke. There was no other medical explanation for his sudden passing. After Julio's death, his girlfriend disappeared. Her current location is still unknown. It's unclear whether she understood what had happened or if she fled in fear. Julio's parents believe she played a role in his death. Authorities have not confirmed if she is being investigated, but her sudden disappearance added to the confusion. The case made headlines across Mexico and in other parts of the world. Many people ask the same question: can a hickey really cause death? According to medical professionals, yes, but only in very rare cases. Robert Glatter, a doctor in New York City, explained that hickeys apply suction to the skin. That pressure can damage blood vessels, especially in the neck. In some cases, a clot can form, travel through the body, and block blood flow to the brain, leading to a stroke. Most people will never have to worry about this. For the majority, hickeys are harmless and disappear in a few days, but under the wrong conditions, they can cause serious problems. Some people are more at risk than others. Those with weak blood vessels or certain health issues could be more vulnerable. Even sudden neck movements, like sneezing or coughing, can sometimes lead to artery injuries. This condition, known as carotid artery dissection, can also happen from something as simple as suction to the neck. Julio's case is one of the rarest on record. His family had warned him about the risks of the relationship, but they never imagined this outcome. Julio Macias Gonzalez was just 17 years old. His death didn't come from an accident or illness. It came from something that seemed harmless, an affectionate gesture that turned deadly.